This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. This week it's the two of us, and we're talking about what it's like to work in a small office and large office. So a fellow designer episode.
Yep.
Episode hopefully helpful for our fellow architects, young architects in particular, and even those who are in school and are transitioning into the profession. So we're going to discuss mainly Marina's experience working at small and large offices.
I don't know why that happened.
And what it's like, pros and cons. I'm sure there's a lot more to discuss with this. So if you have any additional thoughts or questions as you're listening to this, ping us and we can cover it in the future. Sponsors. Stop juggling multiple pieces of software and struggling with design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project, from mood boards to advanced specification tools, procurement tracking to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly errors. Join InterDesign movers and shakers by starting for free at programma.design/secondstudio. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for InterDesign workflows.
If you're looking for an ultra-fast and robust BIM computer program for architecture and or interior design, then we suggest you check out ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architecture and interior design firms around the world to 3D design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. As ArchiCAD continues to evolve with technological advances, architects can push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. We absolutely love ArchiCAD, and you can try the program for free, fully functioning, if you click the link in our episode notes.
This is the Second Studio with myself and Marina. Here we go. So what prompted the idea for this discussion is that a few weeks ago, I was a guest in a class, and in an architecture class, and in that class, we talked to students mostly about career things, right? Applications, portfolios, resumes, interviews,
the real deal,
all of that stuff. And one of the other topics that came about sort of was working at different types of offices, specifically office sizes, and what it's like to work at a small office for a big office, the pros and cons, the benefits and the differences. And I thought it would be a good idea for us to talk about it on here, since I know that our guest of the day, Marina Borderonay, has a varied experience and has worked at small offices and large offices.
Well, you did too, right?
Interviewee.
Okay. Oh, okay,
Let me conduct the interview.
I'm the star of the show. Okay,
so,
sure.
So yeah, that's the purpose of this, right? And I think this hopefully will be useful for, again, people who are about to graduate, but also professionals
who want to switch firms or whatever. Yeah.
Spoiler alert: I tend to believe most people probably should be switching offices
more often.
More often, but there's a limit to how quickly you can do that too. So anyway, that's the premise for this recording, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting because first of all, I think like students and younger professionals are much more informed today than they were, like, let's say 20 years ago, right?
Okay.
I think when I was looking for my first job, I don't think I ever really thought about the size of the firm being something I should think about when applying or looking for a job.
Yeah.
I think I probably thought about where to apply mostly based on what kind of work they were doing and would that interest me to be doing that or not. So it's interesting, but it's actually a valid thing to think about because it would clearly shape the type of experience and knowledge you would gain depending on what size firm you start with at least and you stay at and how long you stay there.
Yeah. So we'll give us some background. So what's the smallest office you've worked for and what is the largest office you've worked for?
The smallest office I worked for was a one-person office in Paris. I was actually freelancing during I think it was my 5th year. I was crazy during my 5th year. I was freelancing, I was babysitting, and I was doing an internship on top of doing school. I was like...
and doing an internship and freelancing was separate?
Yeah.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah, I think they overlapped at some point.
Okay.
I had to stop at some point the freelancing because first of all, the designer was crazy. Okay. So it was not really a pleasant experience. Yeah. And it just became a little bit too much. But yeah, the first, I guess even the first job besides internship would usually, during school in France where the shortest one was 2 weeks and I think the longest one was 3 months. The freelancing job for that one designer. She was a jewelry designer and kind of like a furniture designer. and I was the only person working with her just a few days a week. But I was in the office by myself. Like, she was never there. So it was
it's kind of weird.
So it was kind of weird. And that's also something to think about if you work for like a one-person show, is that person is running around doing a million things, right? So if you're the only employee, you're most likely going to be in the office 100% of the time and have to do stuff on your own. So that's kind of how it started, was with just this one designer. And then when I graduated, my first job, I worked for a couple, so it's 2 people.
Oh wow!
I was like, wow, okay, now we're 3.
That's a 200%. That's a 100% increase. That's twice the number of people, though. It's a lot.
Hey, 50% increase. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. That's a lot. It was good. I mean, looking back, I think it was the right choice for where I was at when I started. I moved from a different country to a city I didn't know, into a country that I did not professionally know how things were working. So kind of like easing into it at a smaller scale practice, I think helped me just get settled and find my bearings before jumping into bigger things. So for me, it made sense.
Because it was more intimate. Is that...
It was more intimate. I had less, in a way, maybe I had less pressure of learning things quickly, because I was the only one there and I was young anyway, so they knew I didn't know a whole lot. And I was a foreigner. And what was cool too is that because I was the only employee, I was involved throughout the whole project at every phase. And, client meeting, conceptual research, material research, construction, like I saw it all, which I feel like if I had started at a bigger office, I probably would not have been able to see a project from concept to punch list.
Gotcha.
So I think for that was very good. And the project was small scale, there were like restaurants and cafes and store design and things like that. So it was it was easy to understand them.
Well, it's interesting, small scale, but scale is of course relative. That's not any smaller, and it's larger than what a lot of small architecture practices do who focus on single family residences. It's pretty common, especially for folks in urban places, to do mostly interiors work. So like a project will be 1 bathroom remodel, which of course, also the way that we kind of quantify projects or qualify them has little to do with the actual scale and more to do with the nature of the work anyway.
Yeah.
A 100 square foot powder room or bathroom can be just as complex almost as something larger if the design excellence is going to be there.
Yeah, no, but that was exactly that. Like that cafe, like we did a lot of custom pieces, that were designed specially for this thing. So I had the freedom to do a lot of the design aspect of things, and like really playing around and given responsibility and freedom in doing things. Was
that position also helpful in understanding how things are executed in the real world? Because the other big difference between school and practice is that in school, everything you do is conceptual. And even if you do a design build, well, that's what I should say. A lot of times when you do like a design build project, it's more of an art kind of installation route rather than something that takes place in reality, in society.
Yeah.
And it's not just a matter of constructing and building components and assemblies. It's a matter of budgets, fees, schedules, clients, approvals, consultants. There's all these other layers that come into play. So when you were doing that restaurant project or whatever projects, was that part of the experience as well?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I came out of school. I didn't know really how to put a drawing set together. I mean, I had seen some during internships for a specific project, but my big picture understanding of what that took, of how the permitting process was working in this new city I landed in, I had no idea how that was working, right? Yeah. Working with consultants, I don't think ever really sat in meetings with consultants or had to talk to a structural engineer or a mechanical engineer, so there was a lot of learning that happened through that experience. I think that was really good. I mean, we started from a meeting with the client, and the client actually had a food truck business, so we it was very important for the client to have us experience how they were working in order to design a restaurant for them. So I was part of that relationship with the client and understanding the needs and the program to design, which I feel like you're not always a part of. So that was super cool. And then seeing everything from going to see the site before designing to understand like what we were dealing with, seeing it under construction, looking at putting together a permit set. What do you need to show in a permit set? How many sheets do you have? What is allowed? Looking at the code. I mean, those were like all things that I was not familiar with. Working with consultants, learning how to read their drawings. It sounds silly because you feel like, oh, you're coming out of school, you should know how to do that. But no, I mean, the first time I looked at an MEP mechanical plan, I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit intimidating too, because you don't know anything. And being in such a small firm, I felt comfortable not knowing things. And I felt more comfortable asking, what things were. So.
Well, I think one of the differences between small and large offices generally is that in a small office, as you said, you get exposed to a lot of different stuff. So if you talk to any professional, that'll be like the number one difference that everyone mentions, which is true, right? Small practice, you get exposed to all the pieces of the process. You're probably given responsibility to do a lot more different things and get exposed to all those slices of the pie. I think also, you were mentioning a second ago that oftentimes when you start, there'll be things you just don't know. They're just a foreign language, it's a foreign drawing, so you have no idea how to, you don't know anything.
I went from working in metrics to Imperial. So I needed a little bit of time.
Yeah, and Imperial is a very strange system. But so what I was going to say is that I think the other difference with small practices is, in addition to the amount of responsibility they give younger professionals, it's not always the case, but I feel like maybe it's more likely that they will help train that person to understand things. Yeah. Because when you're a small practice, let's say you're 3 people in that example, and you're the owners, you don't have the time or money to waste to let someone flounder around for 2 weeks. You can't do that, because when you're that small size, you need someone who's productive, and you also can't be foreign to paying someone a salary when they're not being productive for you. So there's a much more pressure to make sure that person gets trained and you're educating that person. That's really what I'm talking about. Yeah. Whereas in a large office, that's true too, but large offices have a lot more cash and they have a lot more squish, right?
Yeah.
For sure. And they're always hiring and firing people anyway. So in a large office, whether or not you get good continuing education, which is essentially the topic, really depends on like the project manager or whatever title person, but let's say it's project manager. And in big offices, if you have an office of 150 people or something, there's bound to be some bad project managers in there. That's just likely to be the case, right? And so you don't know who you're going to get paired up with. And that PM would feel the responsibility of educating the new young person they've hired, but it's not the same kind of pressure or the same kind of motivation that a 2-person office has when it's their own business, right?
Well, that and the PM has to look good, so they don't always think about what's best for the younger staff.
It's different.
There's different games happening.
Yeah, the only thing that a small office cares about is, well, not the only, but the productivity becomes super important. And the 2 bosses, in your case, they're not trying to impress anybody. They don't have any upper management to impress. They're just concerned, hopefully, with their work and also being a good person, all that stuff, but their work itself. So I think that's also one of the differences generally.
Yeah, that's true.
So 1 person, 2 people. What was the next scale of office that you
the next scale, we went bananas. I think the office I worked at next, we were like 12, something like that.
12? That's pretty good. 1,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, I think 12.
Interesting. Okay.
That's pretty good. That's a great size office, I have to say,
really?
Because you kind of get it. If it's a good office, they have good office culture and like the people are working well together. It's a great size because everyone. You don't have to be best friends with everyone, but you cannot ignore them. Right. Yeah. So you're kind of a family and it's a nice size because you feel like one cohesive unit. When it's a tiny people office with 2 or 3 people, like it's kind of an awkward relationship in a way, if depending on how the fit is, right?
Yeah.
If it's a much bigger office, then it just feels like body parts, like it's very segmented. It could feel very segmented.
What would you say much bigger, meaning 12?
No, much bigger, like, I don't know, 50, 90,
Okay.
100 or beyond that, right?
Gotcha.
Like it just starts to separate into small groups.
Yeah.
When you're 12, you have to be all together.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you're each working on different projects. You might not all be working together on projects, but there is kind of a team spirit, a camaraderie, like like feeling like you're part of the firm a little bit more, which was really nice.
I'm curious, spatially also, like what were the size of these offices?
Oh, I wouldn't know. Well,
come on, let's hear
well,
your
actually,
your
the one in
imperial
Paris
expertise.
was a really fun space because she was renting kind
Which
of
one?
like the one in Paris,
Yeah.
the designer. She was renting kind of like, I think she owned the space, but she had like an upper level and a lower level kind of like underground that had like an atrium skylight that was 2-story tall. That was like a really interesting space. I don't know if her husband was an architect actually. So that was cool, but it was just like one room. The one in New York, when I worked for this couple, that was one room.
Yeah.
So it was probably, I don't know, a 10 by 15 room
I was gonna
with
say
3
12 by
desks
15,
and a
yeah.
big ass printer and
Yeah.
shared bathroom on the floor with other offices and a shared conference room that people could use on the floor for their meetings. So that was very intimate. Like if you're blasting your music in your headphones, like your boss could hear it. They were on phone call with clients, like I was in the room listening to the calls. So
If they have arguments, you can hear it.
well, they were speaking a different language between the two of them, so I couldn't really
But you
quite
could
understand.
hear
but you could hear the silence.
Yes. Yes. And then in the 12-person sized office.
I don't know how big that space was. I mean, it was probably 15 by, I don't know,
30, 40,
40,
something like that. Yeah. I mean, you have 12
I mean,
stations.
it's New
and
York
everyone
space,
has
so it's not.
yeah, it's not
very,
very gracious. Yeah, but everyone has their own desk, obviously. And an odd thing too that I found with a lot of architecture offices is that they have desks, but the desks are never like fucking big enough for drawings. I only worked at one place where everyone had 2 desks. There's one in front of you, which was a little bit shallower, and that was for your computer. And then there was a proper drafting table. I mean, an actual drafting table with a Mayline on it, which none of us really used. But, those tables, I forget the size, but they're like 5 by 3. They're huge. And there you could put drawings, multiple drawings on it and look at it. And of course, real estate in New York City is a premium. And this is most of our experiences was in New York City whilst working in offices. But nevertheless, I was always like, this is so silly. Like I can't, printing on an 11 by 17 set is great for certain things because it's handy, but that's not a real way to check drawings. And it just, the process becomes really chopped up. But that's an aside. The reason why I ask about the size of the offices is because that's the other thing I think people should try and imagine was like, what is it like to be in that office physically, right? What is the atmosphere, right? The experience of the space, the architecturalness of the space. What is it like with the people? And to your point, when you're with a small office, it's not always the case, but it could be one room. It's a box. You're in a box that's in an office building, and maybe you have some good windows, maybe you don't. And if you don't, it's even worse. You're just in a box with your boss like the entire day.
I mean, the view of that tiny box was incredible.
Well,
it was on the
you had a good
13th
boss.
floor looking over New York City skyline. I mean, I was like, you know what? The office itself sucks, but the view every morning was just like, I was like, hey man, I live in New York City. Like this is where I work every day. It was quite something. And seeing the weather change, I mean, it was incredible. But yeah, you have to be the type of person who could be comfortable being in a room with your boss.
Yeah.
Like 5 days a week, all day, because if you're not, then that's definitely not the right size firm for you. But yeah, you're right. The desk setup is very important, and it also somehow informs you of how much they care about their employee setup and their employee themselves. It sounds silly,
That's true.
but that 12 people office, we had the most perfect ergonomic setup of desk. it was kind of like just an L shape, right? But you had like your desk with 2 monitors, normal size monitors, a normal depth desk, maybe 30 inches deep or whatever. That was big enough that you could have a drawing in front of your keyboard and you had room. Overhead storage, drawers below, and then to your right, if you're right-handed, it's great. If you're left-handed, maybe it's a bit more complicated. But you had a big table where you could have 24 by 36 drawings laid out.
Yeah.
So you're doing your coordination or your stuff. You could bounce back between the two, and then your coworker is ahead on the other side, but you don't necessarily face them or see them. So the setup was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And that made me think also that the way it was set up, somebody had thought about it. They didn't just go to IKEA, put some desk, and voila, here, this is your workspace. Like, make the most of it.
Yeah, it's or they didn't design the office based around what looks good, and that's the thing. I've I don't know. It's always bothered. The L-shaped desk is or U-shape even is the ideal desk for an architect.
Yeah.
Like I understand a lot of work happens in the computer, but still, for most people, including myself, you need that ability to switch over and sketch really quick. And just, you can't when you have a keyboard and mouse in front of you. It doesn't work. You got to shift the keyboard. It doesn't fit over there. Then your sketchbook doesn't fit, all this kind of bullshit. You need dedicated space for that. And it also allows you to, I think, in a creative sense, like break away from one mode, one frame, one way of being in stasis, kind of to another headspace. But anyway, so yeah, the office, the size itself makes a difference, and I understand what you're saying. When you have a 12-person, you have more dynamics between people. What was the next scale that you went to? It's interesting because it seems like you almost incrementally.
Yeah. It was. I don't think it was on purpose at all. Because it's kind of naturally happened that way. Maybe I was feeling more comfortable being in bigger offices. I don't know, or I was interested in doing bigger work, and maybe therefore, I moved to like bigger firms.
Yeah. Because
it actually did make sense. Like the smaller firm I worked at, it was a small project, and as I moved into a bigger firm, the projects got bigger. The next firm office was, I think it was an office of 200, so it went from 12 to 200. Talk about desk setup, that was the worst. I had the corner by the bathroom with a dinky monitor. I'm like, I wouldn't even watch TV on this. Like, you're expecting me to do drawings? Like, what?
It's weird how that works.
No daylight because the floor plate was so big that I was in the middle of it. So there was no window nearby. It was pretty awful, I have to say. That's why I did not stay there.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's where it was kind of weird because I left that 12 people firm. That was really great. Like, good people. Move into the bigger office to do bigger work, different types of work, And I had some regrets the first week I started in the bigger office because I understood what I had left behind. And I understood that what I left behind was actually not bad, in terms of like people, setup, and whatever. But then I did think about the work that I was doing and that I would keep doing if I stayed there. And that, really what prompted my change in career, right?
Change in office.
Yeah, change in office. But working at a 200 people firm, I think you really start to see the divisions and the groups. Like, it's like a whole other beast that you're dealing with, especially if the office tends to be very competitive. Then you are talking about different studios, like competing against each other, trying to get the best project. And then you're getting into the hierarchy of management and political games of project managers trying to look good. So they're like asking you to do all-nighters and doing the crazy hours so they can look good on paper to their bosses. And it's not even about the work anymore. It's about the political games in the office. And I'm not saying that every 200 people office is like that, but
it's more common.
It's not a family anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's a business with people who want to get promoted and want to go to the top and they want to get the best project. And like, you're hunting. You're not just like coexisting as a unit. Now you're hunting. So it's very different vibe.
I'm an associate. I want to be senior associate. Then I want to be partner. Then I want to be senior partner. Everyone's gunning for the next thing.
I know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter what level you're at too. Like, I was at a fairly junior level when I started at that big office, and I had people at slightly above my level that were giving me shit. And I'm like,
I remember
look,
you saying that, yeah.
from the PM, I get it. Like, his career is on the line. Like, he has to perform. Like, it's about performance. It's not about creativity anymore. It's about performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting shit from like the lower staff, and I'm like, hey, you might have been here for a year or two longer than I did, but I don't think you're in any position to talk to me like that. So that's not gonna fly.
One of the things that happens with offices, and the larger they get, and sometimes it doesn't have to do with size either.
No.
But the people at the very top lose sense of what it's actually like to be in the office. I don't mean that they're out of touch with reality. I mean that they're out of touch with their own office, and they don't actually know how it's functioning, and they don't know what it's like to feel, what it feels like to be there as an employee or as a project manager. And that can happen very quickly, actually, even with smaller size offices of, let's say, 12 people. If the partners are always out, they're flying around, going to meetings, and they're never in the office, they don't actually know what it's like to be in the office. And that reminds me also that one of the challenges of working at a new place is you really oftentimes don't know what it's like to be in there until you start.
Yeah.
And that's for a number of reasons. One, a lot of times the person you interview with is not the person you work with.
No.
Two, even if that is the PM you're going to work with, you don't know who your team members are. You don't necessarily know exactly what project you're going to be on, and that projects are going to change always. And so there's just a lot of unknowns. You just don't know until you start. The best way to solve that is to ask really good questions during the interview, and then know someone in the office to ask them what it's like. But even then, their experience, if the office is larger, if the office is, let's say, 50, 60 people or upwards, they might be on a team, and their exposure is to the 6 people on their team, and maybe they've been on that team for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
And they don't know what the other 40 people are like. And as you said, when you get to larger practices, things get siloed and teams run more on their own, right? There's a lot more delegation because there has to be. And therefore, there's a lot less oversight at the granular level. So I might have a very good understanding, or I might have one experience of a large office. That's my own experience, though. You get assigned to this other person, they're fucking wackos. Yeah. They're here all the time. My team doesn't do that, right? But they do. So you're like this... is it pachinko? No, you're like a ping pong ball or like a pinball.
Yeah.
I don't know what slot you're going to end up in. It really depends when you go down the little, I think it's, what is it called? Plinko? You know, the thing you put the ball at the top and it bounces around and it goes down by gravity, and there's all these pegs and do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what it's called, but yeah.
it's kind of like that. You drop the ball at the top and you don't know where it's going to go.
But it's interesting, from a management standpoint, you're right. Like, the people you interview with are often not the ones that you're working with. Yeah. And I'm like, well, if you're in office and you're recruiting, and you're probably recruiting for a specific project, because let's be honest, you kind of should know how much work projects are going to take, how many people you have available, how many you would need, right? So there might be a chance that person you hire is going to go in another team if the projects get put on hold, but most likely that person is going to be assigned to a team before they are even hired.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
If you're smart for the office, I would just have the people who are running that team being the one in the interview, because I think it's crucial to have the right fit between people.
Yeah.
That 200 people office, I had amazing 2 interviews there with 2 great people that were not the ones I worked with. And the guy I worked with was a dick. And I'm like, if you had interviewed me, I would have been like, I don't think I would want to work with you, because I don't think this is going to work. Yeah. So it's just a huge waste of time for everybody in the end.
It really is.
Then goodbye, I'm going to leave and go to work somewhere else, and you're going to have to find someone else. So you just wasted 3 months here. And
by the way, I'll have nothing good to say about your practice in private. We're not going to list them on here. Maybe we should. Tempting.
Well, it's not hard to find the information.
Okay. I stripped all mine off. People don't know anything about my past because I don't want that. And offices change. I didn't have a question, actually. I just started talking.
But that reminded me that because it's kind of like siloed into small groups and small teams, the small office I started with, I was always able to directly talk to the boss.
The 12-person office.
The 12-person office, the 3-people office, the 1-person office. I had direct line of communication. They knew my name. I knew their name. I had a problem. I had a question. I could just go straight to them if I wanted, right?
A problem and a question about the project, but also other things.
Yeah.
Anything about the office.
I didn't have, like once you pass a certain threshold of office size, you have to talk to HR. You can't just talk to your boss.
I fucking hate HR.
And HR is usually the least helpful staff in an office. Let's just put it that way. I've never met any HR person who was great, either helpful, doing their job, and
I had one that was actually really good, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't. They never get me what I wanted, so actually it was not helpful.
You wanted Summer Fridays.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, I did do that one year. Yeah. We had a suggestion box or something, and I submitted Summer Fridays, and that came up on a weekly office meeting. They're like, so we got some requests for Summer Fridays. I was like, everybody wants them. I'm going to put it in the box. Yeah. Did not happen.
Summer Fridays, for people who don't know, I don't know, in New York City specifically, it's pretty common. And what that means is that generally every Friday or every other Friday during the summer season, you get off. And sometimes it means you literally just get a day off to enjoy being in the city or doing whatever.
Oh, usually a half day.
Other times it's a half day. Actually, most of the time it's half day, and sometimes it's like, okay, everyone's going to start earlier and end later, or some kind of combination.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do
of those 4 days to make up for the 5th day. Yeah. And at one point, I for the places I worked at, I did the math. I'm like, actually, you're getting more work from us for these Summer Fridays than not. But anyway, it's pretty common. So I was actually surprised I'm surprised when a large size office doesn't have something like that. In New York, because at least at that time it was very, very common.
Yeah, and everybody knows that Friday afternoon nobody gets anything done.
Yeah,
we're each taking long lunch break, long pee breaks. It's like coffee in the kitchen for half an hour. Maybe cleaning up your desk. That's going to take an hour.
Because you're drinking all that coffee for the extra half an hour.
No, but we all know it's not the most productive time of the week. But yeah, so once you get into a certain size office, your boss might not even know that you exist, might even know your name.
Yeah.
You're probably never even going to have a one-on-one conversation with them.
Yep.
Which is a weird thing, because as much as I get they're busy and they're running an empire and they cannot be available to everybody, for me as an employee, I kind of had some problem with that, because I felt like I don't really know what I'm working for here. Who am I working for? Mm-hmm. I know there is things I have to do and I have to please my PM and whatever, but I don't really understand who is behind this entity. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't give me a sense that they care about me participating in it. So there is a little bit of
disconnect.
I feel like I could give more of myself if I had a better connection with that person than if I didn't.
Yeah. Did you use the word family, or did I make that up?
Yeah. For the 12-people office?
Yeah. So businesses are super fascinating things, and teams are really fascinating things, because at the 12-person size or even 20-person size, so there's different thresholds. So let me take a step back. So in terms of what it's like to work in offices, different scales, there's breaks, right? The 1 to 3 to 4 person is one scale. It's very, very, very intimate. They're all kind of very similar. The next kind of breaking point is at around the 12-person mark. And most people listening to this should understand what 12 people feels like, because you've probably been in a studio that's about 12 people. And you understand the dynamics of 12 people.
Or think of a family dinner of 12. It's like your brothers, your sisters, maybe your close aunt and cousins.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Except for, I think the family component distorts that experience, but fine. So then you have 12. The next breaking point is probably around 20, 22, 25 at most. That's another threshold. And if you talk to almost any architect, they'll say the same thing, especially if they run a business. That's another breaking point. And I was talking to someone recently, super successful office in California, and they were like, we've learned over the last decade or 12 years, or how long it's been, that I think I forget the number you mentioned. It was like really specific. It wasn't 25 and 20. It was like 23. It was like a very specific number. It's like, that's the max. Past that, it just doesn't work for us. But it's always around there. Somewhere between like 21 and 25. That's another breaking point. Then you get to like 40. And then there's like kind of beyond that, maybe like 80 and then 200 and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in the smaller scales, those are the breaking points. In a team that's led by a boss or two bosses, when you're small and up to like 25 or like say 20 or so, it's different because the mission statement and the objectives and the ethos of the office comes from the boss in any scale.
Yeah.
But in a small scale, it comes from a direct human being. And that mission statement and the purpose and why we're all here is communicated through an actual person. And you get it from them through what they say and what they write down, yes. And let's say the branding of the office and stuff like that. But you get it also from them just as a person, how they dress, how they look, how they talk, their mannerisms. When they come in the office, it's them. It's a person. The person is the mission statement. And it's much easier for an employee, for us on that level, to understand them and to vibe with them and to get it and to feel like we're together. When you get to a larger scale, that can't be the case because the boss, unless you have multiple partners and there's like one in the office all the time, one that's doing marketing and one that's doing something else. But outside of that, the boss is probably flying around or going to job sites and meeting clients and schmoozing and doing all the stuff they have to do to keep work coming in and all the other many things that come into place with a larger scale business. So at that scale, let's say 90 people or so, the mission statement and the purpose, the drive, is not communicated by a real life human being that you see all the time. It's championed by their kind of disciples, their PMs, who might not be very good. And it's also conveyed through much more corporate-y kind of things like branding, mission statements, and like retreats, or I don't know, whatever other stuff that happens. And a lot of times it just feels like those things are manufactured. They're not personal. They're not intimate. And I think also it can be, and it can feel like that way of communicating a mission statement, let's call it, is unnatural for a young practicing architect, because the work we do in school and when we graduate is very intimate. Right? It's design. It's us at our desks by ourselves, or maybe with a team of 3 people that we're working with. It's very, very, very intimate. And the essence of what we're doing and the project and the mission is all like immediate. It's right there. It's literally within, 3 square feet of like where you exist. In a big office, it's not that anymore. It's now some text in like, Times New Roman Helvetica, whatever font, that says this is the purpose of the office, our mission statement, goals, and whatever. And it feels unnatural, especially for a fresh graduate, right? It's like, what is this? And oftentimes the bullet points and the mission statements are in fact not proper mission statements. In other words, they're not good ones. They don't even qualify as big mission statements. And they have just some generic thing like, we exist to produce good things for good people, for good society, and sustainability is always in there. It's like, but doesn't mean anything. Yeah. And so, it's a long way of saying that I agree and understand that when you're in a large office, sometimes it feels like, wait, what are we doing here? What is the purpose? Why am I working so late?
There is that, and I think also there is also at some point you start feeling a strong division between the upper management and the lower management in larger size offices. And now a little break for our show sponsors. We're supported by Enscape. Enscape is a real-time visualization and VR tool that we personally use and recommend. And the reasons why we like it is that it's fast, realistic, and actually easy to use. The interface is great and they have a good library of components. It also renders in real time, which means that you don't have to waste time waiting for the image to be rendered to see what it's going to look like. It's also a plugin that works with all of the major 3D modeling programs, and it's available for Mac and PC. So if you want to up your visualization and rendering game, I think you should look into Enscape. So make sure you click on the Enscape 3D link in our show notes for a free trial. The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk. Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire.
Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders. The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to support this podcast. Learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in our show notes. Do you mean upper, do you mean middle management, or do you mean like upper as in like the partners?
Oh, like the partners and the PMs, let's say. And then everyone else that's below that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an awkward thing because you feel like you're not part of the big club, you know? You kind of feel like you're being used in a way, even though, I mean, you're being paid, like it's your job, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't feel like you're fully part of it because like a whole portion of the project is kept secret from you, but you're still expected to be doing design work and perform and like, produce all of those things.
As if you're smart, as if you're part of a small team. As if you're really
part of the, as if you know everything about the project, which is kind of strange, right? Because like I said in previous experiences, like it's a small team, you meet with the clients, you know about the budget, the schedule, like you're part of the phone calls with the clients, like you know everything that's going on about the project, which is very important in understanding what is up and how to respond to that. Versus you're designing and you're on your desk in your own corner, you report back to your PM, and then your PM takes that, presents it to the clients without you.
Oh, no, they present it to the partner.
Yeah.
Who then
presents it to the client without you, who has conversation about what you've done without you. You're not able to see or understand the reaction or the feedbacks of the clients. It's being reported to your PM and your PM is reporting it to you. So obviously information gets lost, things get misinterpreted between what actually the client meant to say and the feedback that you got back at your desk.
Go ahead.
So it's a little bit of it's a weird thing for a creative process to chop parts of it and hide them away and hope to still get the best results.
It doesn't work. So it's tough. So as an architect, right, when we're doing a project, forget all like the layers of people and staffing and all that stuff. Let's just say you're an architect and you have a project and you're going to do that project on your own, right? The one of the strengths of any architect, good ones at least, is that you're able to think big picture and detailed at the same time. And we've talked about this before. You're constantly zooming in and zooming out, and you are critiquing the big picture through the details, and you're critiquing the details through the big picture, which is it's not everyone's able to do that.
No.
I think there are definitely creative practices and other creatives who are very good at that, but architecture operates kind of at the extreme scales. So depending on the size of the project, you're even for like a residence, like I'm thinking about the neighborhood, which is a crazy thought. Like most people wouldn't even think about the neighborhood, but I think about the neighborhood first. And then I think about all the way down to like reveals. And sometimes those two coexist in a span of 5 minutes of thinking, right? So we are trained to think that way and to be that loose and kind of flexible in our minds. But that's the opposite of what you're describing, right? That's by the way, that's also how we achieve success. That is absolutely necessary for success, is to have that ability. And when you don't have that ability, because you're only given you're looking at the project through a keyhole, but you're still asked to perform as if you have all the information, it's almost not possible.
No, and it makes me think also that it's almost like if you were compartmenting your design and creative process, like I worked on a project, for example, where the PM was the worst. Like she had no idea what she was doing. And looking back at the project, what I'm thinking is that it was a big remodel on the beach. And, the thing is the house was crap that we started with. And I think we tried to retain too much of it. Mm-hmm. Like there was no big approach. There was no like maybe option, like trying to think differently. And that was probably generated from the person at the top, which was the PM, right? Mm-hmm. Because she was probably thinking that she's the one who should decide what direction the project should take. Maybe, but, maybe not. Maybe everybody in the team should have a time and space to think about that.
They should.
Because again, like, you can give me the bathrooms to design and I could do a great job at designing a bathroom, but if the house doesn't make sense, then the project is not going to be good.
Yeah.
So you cannot compartment the creative process and design thinking of a whole object into tiny bits, because that's where I think it just falls apart.
At the same time, I think this is...
Or at least at the early phases, right? And when you talk about production, then sure,
Production
we
is
can
different.
split the
Production
work,
is
because
different,
production
yeah.
is a different exercise.
But I think that's, you know, anyone who has a large office or is working at a large office is saying, well, that's it. We don't do it that way. And there's practicality also, right? It's not practical to have everyone part of every meeting, because then you'd have a meeting with like 6, 8, well, probably more than that, but like 5 people from the office every time. But I would like to push back on that a little bit, because I do think that there's not only an efficiency gain, but there's a knowledge gain too. So what happens when there's too much compartmentalization and too much siloing is that the people who are looking at the project through a keyhole, that's all they learn. So they're not able to evolve as individuals, which is not good for them. It's not good for the profession. It's not good for the office, because when are they going to evolve and do more for you? It's hard, especially when we get to like really large projects like airports or civic centers and stuff like that, then things have to be chopped up. And then the question of delegation, teamwork, and all those things becomes much more complicated. But I think the principles of what we're describing still exist. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the I think the downside of working at big offices. The good side, though, is that you might not always work with the same team in a big office, depending on how they're structured. Like, some offices are very strict about, like, you belong to this studio, they own you, right? Like, and if you want to move, you basically have to change office. Like, they're just not going to move you around, which is partially what happens with that 200 people office, is that PM and I were not working well together. I'm like, just move me to another studio. Oh, can't do that. All right, then goodbye, which is kind of dumb. I'm like, okay, well, that just tells me you don't really care about keeping me, so that's that. But if you work in an office where you can move around team, that's pretty awesome, because you do get to work with different people. And it's almost like changing office without changing office. Like, you keep all of your bases the same. It's just like maybe for 6 months, you're going to be working on the other side of the office with another team. And 6 months later, you're back on another project. And so it's kind of nice, because in a way, it gives you different types of experience with different people without having to move firm. Which I think could be really good. And if they're, again, accommodating, if it doesn't work in one team, you can go talk to HR and ask them to move you around. No, it's true. I mean, I think anybody who's in that position, as you described specifically, and they're not happy, try and move. If they don't let you move, then just quit. I think I've said this before on here a while ago, but so what happens when people work at an office is that you allow yourself somewhat subconsciously to be blind to the problems of the office. Because if you were to be very conscious of all of the problems of that office and you were to think about them every day, you would be depressed, right?
And then there is no perfect office. I mean,
there's no perfect office. So what you end up doing is you end up kind of like turning a blind eye to all the issues, and sort of out of a survival instinct. But that is a problem at some point, because that means you're kind of giving in, right? You could find something better. So I actually think, for the most part, like, shaking it up and moving offices and moving teams and moving around is probably something more people need to do, because we're all, even architects, right? We love security as human beings, we do. And the older we get, the more we want security and just, being stable. Yeah. But then you allow stupid things to continue, patterns of behavior. Going back where you were talking about, the work being siloed, and let's say you do a design option, and that gets shown to the PM, and the PM shows it to the partner shows it to the client. The other problem that happens with that amount of hierarchy is that it's like the game of telephone, right? Yeah. So now you have, instead of, best case scenario is that in the client meeting, it's the partner, the person who did the work, which really is an obvious statement, like, it makes sense. And then the client, there's no loss of communication, right? In the other description, though, you have like 4 layers or 3 layers or something like that. And each of those is a breaking point. And furthermore, you're relying on each of those people to be very good listeners, observers, presenters, and then relayers and people who remember what took place accurately. That's like 4 different skill sets, which rarely coexist in one human being. And so if you think about like the math of it, like the chances that happens for one person, the chance of that happening between 4 layers of people or 3 layers of people, it's just not likely. It's super, super unlikely. I mean, even for us, you know, would we have meetings with clients or anyone else? It's a huge difference when there's 2 people on our team present, because it's 2 different perspectives and there's different interpretations and we remember different things. And, you know, so just that trail of, you know, 3 or 4 layers, projects get weird. And that's one of the gripes I think professionals would have also with large projects, where you have clients who are on boards and you have the assigned direct whatever person who's in charge of the project on the client side. Then they have their manager, then their board. And it's just like this shit show of decisions that no one has responsibility for, really. And that can be a great hindrance to something that is complex, creative, and needs to be coherent, like a work of architecture.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I still want to emphasize some of the good stuff, though, for working in big offices, because I do think there's a lot of good things. Well, you get great benefits, you know, compared to smaller places. They often have a bit more to offer. Bonuses could be bigger depending on how generous they are and how well they did.
Security, generally.
If they do a good job at having a good office culture, like there might be things that happen in the office, like, I don't know, after our soccer club, or, you know, things where you can, you know, get to hang out a bit more with some of your coworkers, or like do things in teams for the office, which honestly I've never really been part of, because I feel like it's kind of again, everybody's trying to look good, participating in those things to get to the next level of promotion.
It's like casual fun, but it's not.
But it's not. Fun. Like they keep tabs, like who's joining what and who's leading what, and I'm like, I don't. That's never been my thing. I'm like, no, I don't know. What else? And I mean, of course, you would get to work on projects that are much more complex than probably the one you would be working at a 12-people office. You might have a very limited responsibility on those projects compared to the 12-people office. Like, you would not be the one doing everything for it. Mm-hmm. But you would get into the nitty-gritty details of the things you actually have to do. You know, like for myself, like I did a lot of construction administration on a really big scale project, and it was very complex because of its scale, and being able to get that knowledge was very precious for me to then go on my own, right? So I think depending on where you see yourself later in your career, you also have to strategically think about what size office you should be working out and what kind of skills you need to gain to get to where you want to go. Yes,
where you want to go. There's a lot of benefits to large offices. So I
mean, you worked at a really big one.
I personally think that everyone should have should experience working at different scales of office. Yeah. Now, some folks, they know just in their bones that the really micro scale office, like 3-person, is it for them, and they love that. They don't want anything else. And at that point, it's a personality type too, right? And that's great.
Yeah, but I feel like you should still challenge yourself. Like, you think you know something, you think you want something.
Well, that is a good point. That is a good point
yourself.
Because especially if, like, the person listening, let's say you've just graduated, so you're, I don't know, how old would you be? Like 22 or I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
You got to give yourself the time and the space to try stuff and not make assumptions about yourself, to your point. But I think changing offices, I think working at bigger places is just really, really important, because you just to see a different side of the profession. Like, you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't experienced what you haven't experienced. And large offices, despite their problems that they have often, what's interesting about a large practice is that even if it's not a great place to be at, it's a good way to see how the office is structured, how a business is structured, how a team is structured, and how important all that stuff becomes. As much as I think creatives like to kind of poo-poo on hierarchy and middle management and all these like titles, like associate partner, stuff like that, at some point...
I do.
I know. At some point, though, like that has to exist.
You
or
can't
it's very
just...
likely to exist. It's one way of solving the problem of how do you manage 100 people or 200 people or 400 people. When you get to that scale, you have to manage them and you have to think about it.
Yeah.
And there has to be structures in place. And one of the things I think people would find if you switch from, let's say, an 18-person office to something much larger is that the large offices, they take very, very seriously how they consciously structure things and the operations. Even if they're not good operations, they think about it and they put time and effort into it because they have to.
Yeah.
Small offices, one of the downsides is that oftentimes they're just fucking chaos. There's no structure, no organization. They don't care, right? Because they can just kind of plow through and get it done, and then that's it, and then on to the next. In a large operation, you can't do that. You simply cannot. There has to be structure. And one of the places I was at, I was there, and whilst I was there, we grew from, I want to guess, maybe 12 people to about 25, which is maybe for non-employers sounds like somewhat of a big deal, but for any employer, they would say it's a huge deal. That's a massive growth, it changes the fundamental chemistry of an office.
Yeah.
Like I said before, there's breaking points. To 12 and 25, they're different things, completely different things. And there were growing pains that took place. And there's growing pains that take place with any office, like, again, when you get to certain breaking points. And I think the partners realized at some point, like, we have to really step up our game in terms of structure and organization and systems, like all these things about the business and teamwork and business. Like, we need to think about, we can't just kind of wing it anymore and trust our good people. It's not good enough because there's too many things happening. And I think seeing that is very beneficial. I personally have always been interested in how people work with each other. I've always worked in teams. So I enjoy being part of teams. I don't like the negative aspects of the political games that are played in offices and any large groups, but I do really like the problem solving of how to make that work better. I've always enjoyed it. So that's me personally. That's also why I was drawn to working at a big office. I mean, for me, it was always the work came first, aside from the office size. But that's another reason why working in a large office was appealing to me, and I was okay with it because I wanted to see what it was like. Because it just fascinates me.
The office culture is very interesting, and you're right. When you double the size of a place, it becomes something very different.
I think you can have an intimate office culture up to 25. Once you get past that, it's not the same. Then things start to get split. It's like a, what do you call it? Like, what are those things, like an amoeba that kind of splits? Like when it gets to after 25, it splits in half.
It grows a second head.
Yeah, exactly. Then after it gets like 40, then it splits into 3. And then at 60, it's 4. And then 100, it's like 5. And things just get, split.
And it starts eating itself. And then it's the end.
The other benefit of being at a large office is the wealth of knowledge that exists, right? Someone in the office will have the answer to your question. And if the office is structured properly, then you will have access to that information.
You need
really
to
cool
find
thing.
the old people in the office, and there might be more older people in bigger offices than smaller ones.
That's true.
So you gotta find these people, and that's the people you go to if you have questions. Yeah, that's for sure. I want to go back to the things you said where, we're talking about like, oh, if you're more of a smaller size office, then maybe like you should stick with that after you graduate and all of that. I have to say, I've seen coworkers who did that, like they went and worked for an office right after school and they never left. And it's a very sad thing to notice, I have to say. And I don't know if it's about being comfortable or if it became eventually about becoming lazy, but I think that you should, if you're young and you can move around, like you should always try and challenge yourself and make sure that you keep learning and keep moving. There's nothing more sad than someone who comes out of school and just give up on trying anything in their life, because where is that going to take you, you know?
Yeah.
And also, like, you know, like that specific coworker, for example, work at the same office since after graduation. And then what happens if this person gets let go? Their world crumbles. They've never looked at another job anywhere else. They've never worked in other places. Like, it's kind of like silly and maybe scary to think about, but you also want to make sure that you stay desirable and that you are resilient to whatever might be happening to you in your career, right? So it's not just about collecting tools and gaining skills for the fun of gaining skills. It's to make sure that you become a resilient architect.
A resilient architect. I think the comfort and laziness are like one hairline, you know, they're separated by just a little bit. They're right next to each other. And that's what I was saying before, like security, stability. Like we all desire these things naturally, and it's funny because so what happens when you start off in architecture school is that you start from that position, especially students these days. What do I need to do to get a perfect grade, right? Like tell me the exact framework and lane and the steps. Then architecture school breaks you and says, this is not what it's about. Don't ask me those questions. You figure it out, and then I'll critique you. And by the way, no matter how good it is, I'm still going to critique you and tell you it could be better, because that's just the nature of what we do. And then we get into the profession, and then it kind of, a lot of times we or people, like, they revert back, right? Because there's no longer that intense kind of level of interrogation conceptually or in terms of design and creativity that happens in most practices. And then, you know, real stuff comes into play, like, oh, I have to pay for rent now. I have to live in the city. I have to pay for groceries. I have to pay for transportation, for parking, for my car. And, oh, now I'm thinking of having a kid because I'm getting to a certain age, and and there's taxes and all this kind of stuff. And that all weighs on a person. And then you realize, okay, I have to build in a certain amount of stability just to survive as a human being in where we are today. And it's hard because now we're talking about the financial aspects of being an architect as an employer, an employee rather. And so anyway, with all that stuff combined, I think it is easy for a person to revert back to just wanting to be stabilized, which I'm not saying is...
risk.
And no risk. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think you're right. At a younger age, like, that's the time to be working at different places. I mean, this is also coming from people, like, if you look at our backgrounds, like, of course, we're the ones advocating for trying different things, like, look at who we are and what we've done. But when I hear someone who's worked in the same small town or same office for, like, their entire lives, personally for me, I'm like, how utterly fucking boring is that? My God. Yeah. Also, by the way, unless the office you worked for is one of the rare ones where they are or will be doing really good work, and you know that these people are going to have a future, like folks who started working at OMA from the beginning, folks who started working at Richard Rogers from the beginning, or one of these places, unless it's that, because those situations do exist. So there's some cases where staying at an office makes perfect sense because it's going to change and evolve. Yeah. But if an office who always stays the same size and doing the same level of work for the next 20 years, and that's what's going to be the track, and that's what you've done, then I don't know, I guess good if you're happy, but that sounds just boring to me. And I also think that you just don't know the profession as well as someone who's seen a bunch of stuff. Like, you just don't.
And I mean, what's the risk to move around offices, like to be happier or to fail and just move to another one? Like it's not like architecture offices are this limited job opportunity and profession. There is only like 5 that exist on the planet, so if you leave it, you might never make it back. Like there is a zillion architecture offices, so like what is the big deal? And if you leave an office in good terms too, like you were happy, you did good, but you just want to kind of like try something else, a lot of them, they'll let you come back if you really need to come back. Like like more than once, like employers were good employers, and they know that you have to keep going in the path that you've decided to go. They understand because they've been in those shoes. They'll be like, yeah, go for it. If it doesn't work out, you can always come back, so what's the risk?
Really quick on the subject of moving offices, I think that I've seen, so there's the person who stays at the same office for like 20 years or two offices for 20 years, 30 years. And there's also on the extreme end, the people who move around too much, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like I've seen people, and this tends to happen with academics. So,
or people who just collect names on their resume.
I've seen many, many times people who have, I've worked at Morphosis, I've worked at OMA, I've worked at this place and that place and da 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 da. And I'm like, that's cool. And if you look at their resume, they worked at each place for like 6 months.
Yeah.
And any real architect who does buildings is like 6 months. First of all, in 6 months, you don't actually get to know the offices in 6 months. It takes at least a year and then 2 years and then beyond, probably about 2 years before you actually understand what an office is like. So you didn't actually experience the office in 6 months. You didn't actually do anything of great responsibility, very likely in 6 months. And so it's just, in my view, when I see architects, again, mostly academics, who have this resume that's like the CV that's like 30 pages in all these offices, I'm like, you're a paper architect.
Yeah.
You haven't actually done anything. Yeah. But it's a way to build a CV and a resume. And I've seen people get hired by schools because like, wow, they worked at all these places. I'm like, yeah, but they didn't do fuck all.
They actually didn't put the time or the work. Yeah.
And they don't know anything. Yeah. And so there is a certain amount of time that's needed to learn the craft of the project, of the profession, of design, of the office, and all those things. And 6 months is not enough. So you can learn a lot in 6 months, I guess, if you're working fast and it's like a competition or something. But like, for building buildings, it's not enough time. Yeah. So I do think there's a risk also, like people shouldn't be jumping around too often. You got to give offices an opportunity. You have to give yourself an opportunity to learn things. And it does take time because buildings take time.
Yeah.
It's also, moving offices is the best way to get a raise, generally speaking.
Oh, yeah. No, you have to do that. I mean,
people just hop around and get raises. But, like you said, you have to know your goals. And if you're jumping around every 4 months, to what end? Now, if you want to do that as a strategy to pad your resume to get hired to work at a school, then I guess I've exposed, and that's like a route you could do because I see it all the time. But it's
crazy though.
Fucking mental. Like it's inauthentic is what it is.
Yeah, but you can feel good about yourself doing that. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I think those people don't care. And the problem too, this is going off on a tangent, but the people in charge of hiring at these schools, they're so out of touch from practice. They don't know the difference. Like, oh, you worked at the office, fantastic, hired. Like, but they know less about the profession than you do, probably, even though you haven't practiced for like 40 years. So, what are we doing here?
But yeah, I think, like you said, like we're kind of like assessing, every end of year, you have like a year-end review at the office, especially if you're at a certain size, because I think it's a an HR requirement, to fulfill that, make sure employees are having their check-in and whatever. And if you're in a smaller office, you might not have that, but I think it's important to ask yourself once in a while throughout the year, like, what do you think you've learned? What do you think you need to learn? What do you think you're really good at? What do you think you're not really good at? And see, like, kind of like help you define, like, what's the next path forward, and what direction you need to go. And also, it doesn't always mean that you have to change office to get onto that path or learn those new things. It might also just be that you just need to voice those things out and ask for it, right?
Yeah. At the office.
The office. Yeah. I mean, again, you can gain all kinds of different working experience within one office. It really depends what you want to do and what you ask to be doing. So I think that's ask. I think you just gotta ask.
You have to ask, and if you ask for something that's fair to request, and you believe and you know that you deserve what you're asking for, and it's not unreasonable, and they're not. And the office is not helpful whatsoever, then again, time to move.
Yeah.
If you ask and they're like, we want to do that, this is not the right time, just can you hang on for a bit, we'll try to make it happen, or they say, we'd love to, but we just can't for these reasons, then that's different. Then maybe you consider staying because they're hearing you, and sometimes it's just like logistically not possible or doesn't fit, sometimes two people ask for things, and frankly, as the employer might say, internally, this person's asking for that. I get it, but that's not their skill set. And if I put you on that thing, I know you're not going to be good at it. and that's harsh, but like, you're just sorry. You're just not good at technical stuff. I can tell you're not organized enough to be a PM, or I don't know, whatever it is, or no, you don't have a good design sense, which is the one that's, for me, easiest to see. It's like, there's no chance in hell I'm putting you in charge of design. That's not going to happen. You can stick with project management and that'll be great for us. So I think working at a lot of different places, I tend to advocate working at larger places because I think it's just, you just learn a lot by being you get exposed to a lot of different things. And there are good offices that are large too, and good people. Like the office I worked at that was large was a great experience. And it actually, when you were talking about the interviews and who participates in it, I was thinking that in my interview, the person the director who was in that interview, one of them was the one I ended up working with.
Which makes sense.
I was also more proactive because in that interview, there was like, I think 3 or maybe 4 people. And one of them, I liked them. The other 2 were fine, but this one, I liked them. I felt a good kind of synergy. It felt right. So I called the office after I interviewed. I think this was even maybe before they even gave me an offer. If it was, it's kind of bold of me. But I called and I said, I want to work with that person. Oh no, actually what I did was, this is sort of a tactic for young professionals. I called the office. This was before I got the offer. I called the office because I wanted to follow up and basically have a touch point, but say thanks to the people that interviewed me. And of course, when you call, you don't get the direct line of the person. You get the like HR person, right? Who I became friends with, sort of. And I said, I'd like to speak with this named person who was at my interview. I want to thank them for their time. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that there's probably like 0.1% of interviewees who ever do this. And so the HR person was like, wow, that's great. I'll maybe connect you to this person. That person picks up. It's in the middle of the workday for them. They got projects going on. They're like, hello? I'm like, hey,
what is this?
did you ever be one of 50 people you've probably interviewed the last 2 weeks? So I told him some things and whatever. And I told him like, and also, I don't know how it's going to work out, but if you guys decide to offer me a job, I really want to work with you. And he was like, well, we don't know. He's like, that's not really how it works. I don't know who you're going to end up being with. And so I've always wondered if they knew I was going to be on that team, or if they weren't quite sure, or they had no idea, but me calling them pushed them over the edge. And I could see that. I could see where me calling that person, they could have easily crossed paths with the other individual who's kind of in charge of hiring stuff and said, hey, by the way, Susan, that wasn't her name. Like, that person called me. I liked him too. Like, put him on my team if he gets hired. I could very easily see that being the situation. So yes, I think it's good for employers to have people at the interview who are going to be working with the employees and the new hires, but also if, in this narrative, you have some agency to at least voice your opinion and say, I'd want to work with that person, which is also maybe a way of saying I don't want to work with that other person. And, everyone wants a good fit. That's the thing. And no one wants to your point earlier, it's a huge, if an employer is smart, it's a huge waste of time to not have a good fit, right? So it actually is a benefit. It does everyone a favor if everyone's more vocal, and if the interviewee, the employee, the whoever, if those people are vocal, right? Because anyone who's worked in teams, this, over the long term, everyone naturally kind of moves to where they need to move to, within an office, without an office, within the profession, without the profession. And the sooner you can figure out your natural path, the better for everybody. It ends up being just a huge waste of time otherwise. So yeah. Yeah.
No, it's the small things, sometimes, like, you're right, maybe that phone call really changed the trajectory of things.
It could have. And I was on a great team. It was good people and everything. And that was the office too, where, I knew some people I knew someone who worked in that office prior to me working there. Okay. And I knew through them his experience and the experiences of other people. And like I was saying before, that was the office I was thinking of, completely different experiences. Like, we were, for the most part, on time, on schedule, everyone had in the team good rapport with each other. People were nice. Like it was just a good, like normal team. There was nothing weird about it. There's no drama whatsoever. Other teams, though, not the case. Like they were up all night, all the time. They're 7 days a week doing competitions or whatever things they were doing. And at that point in my career, I had no interest in that. I was past that. I had done that, and I was like, yeah, I'm over that. I don't need to do that anymore.
I want to live longer than 50 years.
I want to live longer than 50 years. So I don't know. It's and again, there's good offices that are small, and there's good offices that are big, and there's bad ones that are small and bad ones that are big. So you also don't know what it's like until you start. So do your best to try and suss it out, but you just got to get in there and kind of get it moving.
The office culture is a weird thing because on paper, you have no idea. You could be doing super cool, exciting project, really design advanced and whatever, and then it's an awful place to work at.
Well, here's the thing too, is that you don't know, and this has less to do with office size, but the work that gets published, well, how do I put this? The work that the office does, but even more specifically, think about this. The work that you see done by that office, which means it's the work that they choose to photograph, they choose to put on a website, and they choose even beyond that to try and get press, right? Mm-hmm. And those are different things. Like doing a project is one thing, getting it photographed is another thing, putting it on a website is on that same tier, and then putting effort to getting it published is another tier too. People don't realize this, but the work you see it because someone made an effort to make sure you see it. It wasn't because it was just good work and then it got published. Yeah. That does happen. That's like 1% of the time does that happen. So the work you're seeing from these offices, they've worked really hard to put that out there. What does that mean? It's their best work. It's their most interesting work. And you don't know who did that work in the office if it's a larger office. So that's one set of issues in terms of transparency to all of this. The other is that the quality of their work does not reflect the quality of the office as a place to be at. They're sometimes not aligned. There are offices I've been at that have done both. There's offices I've been at where it's a great place to work, great people, good everything, good knowledge, but the design excellence maybe was not what a young professional would perceive as being, revolutionary design. I've worked at places where the execution was high level, but I did not like being there. So we're just naming reasons why it's impossible to make a decision before choosing.
But that's why you have to move around again, like find your fit and find what works for you.
And, like I said, 6 months is short earlier, but sometimes within 2 weeks, that this was bad.
Oh,
this was
that
a
place.
mistake.
I mean, after the first 3 days, I was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And it kind of sucks because you're just wasting time at this point, and you still have to go until you find something else. So that's
so much effort.
That's the worst part.
When you're young to like apply and go to an interview, and you're nervous. You're like, am I going to get it? Not going to get it? How much? And
even if you get it, you still don't know what really you're getting until you get it. Yeah. So, but it's exciting. I mean, it's very exciting because once you've found the right place to be, at some point you probably won't move, right? Like, what do people do? It's interesting if you look at a lot of offices who are bigger, let's say, like, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 and beyond. A lot of the staff is really young when you look at team photos on offices' website, which makes me wonder, okay, so what happens to the younger one that were there 15 years ago on that photo? Did they left or they stayed in that office and they're the old one now on the photo?
No, they left.
Like, what,
They left. It is definitely more common for small offices to have a greater number of young people, for sure. Because older people, they have like real things to deal with. Like you have to pay for kids. They have to pay for like alimony or like whatever they have to do, right? And they need stability. And also, again, I don't know why that's the case, but that tends to be the case too. It's interesting. Yeah. My experience real quick in terms of offices is varied like yours, but I've also been part of different music ensembles of different sizes. So I tend to think of this subject matter through those two different lenses. And but the feeling of being in a body of people, it exists in both of those. I will say one of the biggest differences, though, is that when you're in a music ensemble, the question of mission statement and purpose and that drive that you were kind of talking about earlier, that doesn't really exist because it's part of it.
Right.
It's weird. Like, if you're part of a music ensemble, you're choosing to be there, at least in the cases for me. I never was professional in the sense that I didn't do it for a living.
Right.
Made a little bit of money a few times, but it didn't do it as for a living, so maybe that's the reason why. But like the largest group I was a part of, I think we were like 150 or so, which is a big group. But I loved it. It was so much fun. I love that size of people. I love that. You're shaking your head. No.
It gives me heebie-jeebies.
But it's also different, I think, with the music ensemble because the purpose is so singular, and there's, it's different because you're performing you actually perform together. Right. Whereas an office of 150 people in an architecture office, you're not performing together. You're each doing your own projects. But so it just made me think as you were talking, like, the clarity of direction was there for those ensembles. And I think when you have, maybe it's also a way to say that if you have that, you can have 150 people, 200 people that performs really well. The people are tight. Again, you're not friends with everybody, but you do feel like a big family. It literally feels like you're a big, fun, cool, interesting, dynamic family. And by the way, you come together 3 days a week to produce really cool stuff that you viscerally enjoy.
Yeah.
And if that can be created in a design and architecture office, I think you've won. And that's the problem that I want to solve.
Good luck.
All right. I'm hungry, so should we wrap it up?
Yeah.
Give us an outro.
Thanks everyone for listening to this Fellow Designer episode. If you like the show, please follow us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, social media, everywhere where you listen to your podcast. The best way to support us is also to leave us a review. That always helps. Subscribe, share, do the usual. You can find all of our episodes on our website, secondstudiopod.com. We're also on Instagram, secondstudiopod. All of our episodes comes out on Tuesdays. And we have some video interviews and such on our YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. We also have the hotline 213-222-6950 that you can send a text message to or call and leave a voicemail. If you have any questions, any advice that you're looking for, any guest suggestions that you want to send us, do it that way. And that's it.
That's it.
A lot more to come. Stay tuned.